Story 1, the Phantom Way Station. Marcus Dunn had been hauling freight across Interstate 80 for 23 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the road had to offer. He'd driven through blizzards that turned the highway into a white void, navigated fog so thick it felt like driving through cotton, and once watched a tornado touch down less than a mile from his rig. But nothing in those 2 decades of experience prepared him for what happened on a humid night in July of 2022, somewhere between Cheyenne and Rawlins, Wyoming. The load was simple enough: refrigerated pharmaceuticals bound for Salt Lake City, time-sensitive, but not particularly difficult. Marcus had made this run dozens of times, knew every truck stop, every rest area, every place where the highway patrol liked to sit with their radar guns. He'd left Cheyenne just after sunset, planning to push through to Rock Springs before taking his mandatory break. The Kenworth's engine hummed steadily beneath him, the air conditioning fighting against the residual heat of the day. Around 10:30, his CB radio crackled with the usual chatter, drivers warning each other about construction zones, asking about road conditions ahead, the normal rhythm of the night shift. Marcus was 40 miles east of Rawlins when he saw the signs for the way station. Bright blue reflective letters announced it a mile in advance, then half a mile, then the standard "all commercial vehicles must enter" sign that every trucker knew by heart. What struck Marcus as odd was that he couldn't remember a way station at this particular location. He'd driven this stretch of I-80 hundreds of times, and there were only 3 way stations between Cheyenne and Rock Springs. He knew them all intimately, knew which ones were usually open at night, which ones had the friendliest inspectors. This one didn't match any of them. He checked his GPS, but the screen showed nothing, just the highway stretching forward as a blue line. The way station appeared around a gentle curve, and Marcus felt his first genuine spike of unease. The facility was old, that much was immediately apparent. While most Wyoming way stations had been updated in the past decade with modern equipment and fresh paint, this one looked like it hadn't been touched since the 1970s. The building was a low, utilitarian structure of weathered concrete blocks, its windows dark except for a yellowish glow that seemed to come from deeper inside. A single overhead light illuminated the scale platform, casting everything in harsh sodium vapor orange. The open sign was lit, so Marcus had no choice but to pull in. Wyoming didn't mess around with way station violations, and the last thing he needed was a ticket for bypassing an open scale. He downshifted and guided the Kenworth onto the approach ramp, feeling the familiar lurch as the truck's weight settled onto the scale platform. He waited and waited. Normally, the process took less than a minute. The scale registered your weight, a green light told you to proceed, and you were back on the highway before you'd fully stopped. But Marcus sat there for 3 full minutes, engine idling, watching the dark windows of the scale house. No green light, no red light, nothing. Finally, he saw movement behind the glass. A figure approached the window, but Marcus couldn't make out any details. The glass seemed fogged or dirty, and the person behind it was just a shadow. Then a speaker crackled to life, the sound so distorted it was barely comprehensible. "Pull forward, inspection bay 3. Marcus's stomach tightened. An inspection at this hour on a routine pharmaceutical run with all his paperwork in order. It didn't make sense. But arguing with a way station official was a quick way to turn a 5-minute delay into a 2-hour nightmare. He eased the truck forward, following the faded painted arrows toward the inspection bays. The building looked worse up close. Paint peeled from the concrete blocks in long, cancerous strips. The pavement was cracked and buckled, weeds pushing through gaps that should have been repaired years ago. Marcus counted 4 inspection bays, each with its own roll-up door, all of them closed except for bay 3. The interior beyond was completely dark. He pulled the truck to a stop and set the parking brake, leaving the engine running. Protocol said he should shut it down for an inspection, but something about this place made him want to keep the Kenworth ready to move. He climbed down from the cab, his boots crunching on gravel that seemed too loud in the stillness. No one came out to meet him. "Hello," Marcus called out, his voice swallowed by the darkness of the bay. "I'm here for inspection." The only response was a deep, rhythmic thumping sound from somewhere inside the building. Not mechanical, it was too irregular for that, too organic. It reminded Marcus of a heartbeat, if a heartbeat could be the size of a truck engine. He pulled out his phone to call dispatch, let them know he was being held up. The screen showed no signal, which was impossible. He'd had full bars just 2 minutes ago on the highway. He tried anyway, but the phone wouldn't even dial. The screen flickered once, twice, then displayed a series of numbers that made no sense. 88, 88, 88. That's when Marcus noticed the date on his truck's dash computer. It read August 3rd, 2022. But that was wrong. Today was July 18th. He'd left Cheyenne at 7:45 on July 18th. He was absolutely certain of that. The thumping sound grew louder, and now Marcus could hear something else beneath it. Voices, maybe, or the sound of radio static shaped into almost words. He backed away from the inspection bay, his instincts finally overriding his professional obligation to follow protocols. "I'm leaving," he announced to whoever or whatever might be listening. "Equipment malfunction. I'll stop at the next station." He climbed back into the cab, released the parking brake, and started to ease forward. The truck moved about 3 feet before the engine died. Not sputtered, not coughed, just stopped as if someone had flipped a switch. All the electrical systems went dark simultaneously. The dashboard, the GPS, the CB radio, even the overhead lights in the sleeper berth. Marcus sat in complete darkness and silence, his heart hammering against his ribs. Outside, that thumping sound continued, closer now. He could see shapes moving in the inspection bay, silhouettes that didn't quite match human proportions. They moved with a strange, stuttering motion, like frames of film being played at the wrong speed. He tried the ignition. Nothing. Tried it again. The starter didn't even click. Then the CB radio crackled to life, though every electrical system in the truck remained dead. A voice came through, male, urgent, terrified. "Don't let them inspect the cargo. Whatever you do, don't let them see what you're carrying." "Who is this?" Marcus grabbed the microphone, but it was cold and dead in his hand. "They're looking for something," the voice continued, ignoring his question. "They've been looking for years, decades. They stop trucks, check the cargo, search for whatever it is they lost, but they never find it. And they never let you leave if you can't help them." The shapes were emerging from the inspection bay now, moving toward his truck. In the faint orange glow of that single overhead light, Marcus could see that they wore uniforms, or what had once been uniforms. Dot inspector jackets, patches on the shoulders, but everything was wrong. The colors were faded to the point of being gray. The fabric hung on frames that moved like they were being puppeteered rather than animated by muscle and bone. "How do I get out?" Marcus whispered into the dead microphone. "You don't," the voice said. "You never left. You've been here for 16 days. Your company reported you missing on July 19th. They found your truck 3 miles down the highway with no one inside. You're not at the way station anymore, Marcus. You're somewhere else, somewhere in between." The figures surrounded his truck now, pressing pale hands against the windows. Their faces were indistinct, features blurred as if seen through frosted glass. They were looking in at him, searching, and Marcus realized with horror that they could see him, but couldn't quite understand what they were seeing, like they were blind creatures feeling their way through darkness. One of them raised a hand and tapped on the driver's side window. The sound was wrong, too hollow, like knocking on the inside of a coffin. Marcus pressed himself against the far door as far from those hands as he could get. The CB crackled again. "Listen to me carefully. When I was trapped here, I figured something out. They exist in a loop, searching for the same thing over and over. But the loop has a break point, 3:13 a.m. At exactly 3:13, there's a moment when everything resets. If you can start your engine at that exact second, you might be able to slip out." Marcus looked at his watch, but the face was fogged over, impossible to read. "What time is it now?" "I don't know. Time doesn't work right here. But you'll feel it, a shift in the air, a change in the pressure. That's when you turn the key." The figures were working on the trailer now, trying to open the doors. Marcus heard the lock mechanism rattling, heard them moving around the back of the rig. The pharmaceutical cargo was locked down tight with both a physical seal and an electronic monitor. But he had no idea if those protections meant anything against whatever these things were. He sat in the darkness, key gripped in his hand, waiting for a signal he didn't understand. Minutes passed, or hours. He genuinely couldn't tell. The figures moved around his truck in their stuttering, wrong-speed way, searching, always searching. Then he felt it. A pressure change, like his ears popping when descending a mountain pass. The air in the cab seemed to thin out for just a moment, and in that instant of change, Marcus turned the key. The engine roared to life. Every electrical system blazed on simultaneously. Dashboard lights, headlights, clearance lights, all of them so bright they seemed to burn. Through the windshield, Marcus saw the figures recoil, raising their arms as if the light caused them pain. He didn't hesitate. He slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator. feeling the Kenworth lurch forward with a violence that made the trailer sway. The tires spun on the broken pavement, found traction, and the entire rig surged toward the exit ramp. The figures tried to block his path, but the truck plowed through them like they were made of smoke. Marcus caught a glimpse in his side mirror of the way station dissolving behind him, the building seeming to fold in on itself like a paper model being crushed. Then he was back on I-80, the highway solid and real beneath his tires. His GPS flickered and displayed his correct location, 40 miles east of Rawlins, exactly where he'd been before. The dash computer showed the right date and time. July 18th, 10:33 p.m. He'd lost 3 minutes. Marcus drove straight through to Salt Lake City, delivered his load, and filed his report. The company said nothing about him being missing. His electronic logs showed an uninterrupted drive from Cheyenne. There was no way station between his logged positions, no 3-minute gap, no evidence that anything unusual had happened. But Marcus knew better. He'd been somewhere else, somewhere wrong. And sometimes, late at night when he's driving that same stretch of I-80, he still hears that voice on the CB radio, warning other drivers, trying to save them from a place they've already been trapped in, trying to guide them toward that one moment of escape that only comes at 3:13 a.m. He never hauls I-80 through Wyoming anymore. He'll take any other route, add hours to his drive, sacrifice his fuel efficiency, anything to avoid that stretch of highway. Because he knows the truth now, that way station is still there, still searching, still pulling trucks off the highway into its impossible space. And he knows that he was lucky. The voice on the radio had helped him escape. But who helped that voice escape? And who's helping the drivers who get pulled in now? Marcus doesn't know, and he's terrified he might find out. Story 2. The VANISHING mile marker. Jennifer Walsh had driven the I-10 corridor between El Paso and San Antonio so many times she could navigate it in her sleep. 18 years hauling automotive parts for the big manufacturers had given her an intimate knowledge of every mile of that 550-mile stretch of Texas highway. She knew where the road dipped and swayed, knew which overpasses had the worst crosswinds, knew exactly where to stop for the best coffee and the cleanest restrooms. So when mile marker 140 disappeared, she noticed immediately. It was September of 2023, a Wednesday afternoon with the kind of clear, harsh sunlight that made everything look overexposed and bleached. Jennifer was westbound, about 2 hours out of San Antonio, hauling a load of transmission assemblies bound for El Paso. Traffic was light, just the usual mix of commercial trucks and passenger vehicles moving at a steady 70 miles per hour. She just passed mile marker 141 when she realized something was off. The spacing felt wrong. Mile markers on interstates are exactly 1 mile apart. It's literally their purpose, and Jennifer's internal clock, honed by nearly 2 decades of long-haul driving, told her she should have reached mile marker 140 by now. But it didn't appear. She checked her speedometer. 72 miles per hour, right where it should be. She glanced at her GPS, which showed her position as a blue dot moving steadily along the I-10 corridor. According to the GPS, she was between mile markers 141 and 140. But when she looked out the window, searching for that familiar green sign with white reflective numbers, it simply wasn't there. Mile marker 139 appeared right on schedule. Jennifer frowned, assuming she'd somehow missed it. Maybe she'd glanced at the CB radio at the wrong moment, or checked her side mirror right as she passed it. It happened. She made a mental note and continued driving. But then it happened again at mile marker 90. She was watching for it this time, her eyes fixed on the shoulder where the marker should be. Mile marker 91 passed. She counted in her head, matching her internal rhythm to the truck's speed. 1 minute, 2 minutes. At 70 miles per hour, she should be seeing mile marker 90 in about 50 seconds. It never came. Mile marker 89 appeared exactly when expected, but 90 had simply vanished. Now Jennifer was actively worried. She grabbed her CB microphone and keyed it up. This is Big Mama westbound on I-10 around mile marker 89. Anybody else noticing something weird with the mile markers? The CB was silent except for the usual static hiss. That was unusual in itself. I-10 through Texas was typically busy with chatter, drivers warning each other about speed traps, asking about way stations, just talking to break up the monotony. Breaker, breaker, anybody out there? Jennifer tried again. Nothing. She tried her cell phone, thinking she'd call her dispatcher, but the screen showed no signal. That was impossible. This section of I-10 had cell coverage from multiple carriers. She was in the middle of West Texas, not some remote mountain pass. Jennifer's unease was rapidly transitioning into genuine fear. She'd been driving long enough to trust her instincts, and every instinct she had was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. At mile marker 50, she started paying attention to the other vehicles on the road. That's when she noticed the pattern. There were exactly 7 other vehicles in sight, 4 passenger cars, 2 pickup trucks, and 1 other semi. They were all maintaining the same speed she was, all of them spaced at regular intervals. The white Toyota Camry ahead of her in the right lane stayed exactly 300 feet ahead. The black F-150 in her mirror stayed exactly 400 feet back. She tested it. Jennifer eased off the accelerator, letting her speed drop to 65. The vehicles around her slowed proportionally, maintaining their exact distances. She sped up to 75. They matched her perfectly, as if they were all connected by invisible ropes. The other semi, a Werner truck hauling a dry van, stayed in the left lane, exactly parallel to her position. Jennifer looked over at it, trying to see the driver, but the sun's angle turned the windshield into a mirror. She laid on her horn, 3 long blasts, the traditional trucker greeting. The Werner truck didn't respond, didn't acknowledge her at all, just kept rolling forward at exactly her speed. Mile marker 40 didn't appear, neither did 30 or 20. Jennifer's GPS still showed her moving along I-10, the blue dot crawling steadily westward. But the mile markers that did appear were now jumping in seemingly random increments. After 21, the next marker said 16, then 19, then 11. She tried the CB again. Mayday, mayday, this is Big Mama on I-10. Something seriously wrong here. Can anyone hear me? This time, she got a response. But it wasn't a human voice. It was a sound like wind moving through a tunnel, rising and falling in pitch, occasionally forming shapes that almost sounded like words but weren't quite language. Jennifer dropped the microphone, her hands shaking. She'd heard some strange things on CB radio over the years: atmospheric interference, skipped signals bouncing off the ionosphere, pranks from bored truckers, but nothing like this. This sounded hungry. The sun was setting now, which made no sense. It had been 3:30 in the afternoon when she'd passed mile marker 141. Even with 2 hours of driving, it should only be around 5:30, and in September in West Texas, the sun didn't set until well after 7. But the sky was definitely darkening, the sun touching the horizon ahead of her, its light turning everything the color of old blood. Mile marker 3 appeared, then mile marker 8, then a marker that read infinity instead of a number. That's when Jennifer made the decision to get off the highway. She didn't care where, any exit would do. She just needed to break this pattern, disrupt whatever was happening. The exit sign ahead promised Fort Stockton Services next exit, and she'd never been so happy to see the promise of a truck stop. But when she took the exit ramp, it just curved back onto I-10. Westbound, same direction she'd been traveling, as if the exit ramp was just a loop that fed back into itself. She tried it again at the next exit. Same result. The ramp curved away from the highway, gave the brief illusion of escape, then merged back into the westbound lane. The other vehicles were still with her. Same positions, same distances. When she looked at them now in the dying light, she realized they looked wrong. The paint on the white Camry was too bright, almost luminescent. The black F-150's windows were completely dark, showing no interior, no driver, just solid black glass. Jennifer grabbed her logbook, thinking maybe if she stopped the truck, refused to drive, whatever was happening would have to end. She looked for a wide spot on the shoulder, started to slow down. That's when the mile markers started counting backward. Mile marker 3, mile marker 2, mile marker 1, then mile marker 0. Jennifer had never seen a mile marker 0. She didn't think they existed. Mile markers started at the beginning of the highway and counted up, or started at the end and counted down to 1. But there was never a 0 point. Beyond mile marker 0, the highway continued, but now there were no markers at all. Just empty shoulder, empty road, the other vehicles still maintaining their precise formations around her. The sun had set completely now, but there were no stars. The sky above was perfectly black, not the deep blue-black of evening, but the absolute black of a cave. Her headlights seemed to stop after about 50 feet, as if the light itself was being absorbed by something ahead. The CB radio screamed to life, and this time there were definitely words. Turn around, turn around, turn around. Over and over, dozens of voices, all of them terrified, all of them desperate. But there was nowhere to turn around. The The median was a concrete barrier with no gaps. The road ahead was arrow straight, disappearing into that light-eating darkness. Then Jennifer saw it. A mile marker ahead, but this one was different. It wasn't green with white numbers. It was white with black numbers. And instead of a number, it displayed a single word: return. Something about that marker looked real in a way nothing else had for the past hour. It seemed to exist in a different dimension than the highway around it, solid and present, while everything else felt like a projection. Jennifer made a decision that went against every traffic law she'd ever learned. She cranked the wheel hard to the left, steering the semi across the empty westbound lane, the concrete median, and into the eastbound lanes. The truck tilted dangerously, the trailer swaying, but she didn't care. She had to reach that marker. The other vehicles didn't follow. They continued westbound into the darkness, maintaining their formations, and as Jennifer pulled away from them, she caught glimpses in her mirrors of what they really were. Not vehicles at all, just shapes, shadows, things pretending to be traffic. She reached the return marker and passed it, and the world snapped back into focus like a rubber band released. The sun was at 3:35 in the afternoon, exactly where it should be. Mile markers appeared in their correct sequence, counting up as she drove east: 140, 141, 142. Her CB radio crackled with normal trucker chatter. Her cell phone showed full signal. Jennifer pulled off at the next exit, a real exit this time, one that actually led to a truck stop, and sat in the parking lot for 2 hours, drinking coffee and trying to convince herself it had been some kind of hallucination. Heat stroke, maybe, or carbon monoxide from a leak in the exhaust system. But her electronic logs told a different story. They showed a gap, 1 hour and 43 minutes where her truck had simply not existed. No position data, no speed records, nothing. Just a blank space in the timeline, as if she'd been edited out of reality. She filed a report with her company, but what could she say? That mile markers had disappeared? That the highway had become a loop? That she'd driven into some kind of void between destinations? They sent her to a doctor who cleared her for duty. They checked the truck systems and found nothing wrong. And eventually, Jennifer went back to driving I-10 between El Paso and San Antonio. But she watches the mile markers now, counts them obsessively, makes sure each one appears when it should. And sometimes, usually late at night when traffic is light, she sees mile marker 140 and holds her breath, waiting to see if mile marker 139 will appear. It always does, so far. But Jennifer knows now that the road has thin places, gaps in its continuity where the normal rules stop applying. She knows that somewhere between El Paso and San Antonio, there's a segment of highway that isn't quite real, that exists in a state of potential rather than actuality. And she knows that other drivers must be finding it too, because sometimes on the CB late at night she hears voices. Panicked, desperate voices asking why the mile markers aren't matching, why the exits lead back to the highway, why the sun is setting at the wrong time. She tries to answer them, tries to tell them to find the return marker to cross the median to break the pattern, but they never hear her. The CB only carries their voices in one direction, from them to her, never the reverse. She's tried to warn other drivers, posted about it on trucker forums, told the story to anyone who would listen. But no one believes her. They think she fell asleep at the wheel, had a realistic dream, got confused about the mile markers. Only Jennifer knows the truth. That somewhere on I-10, there's a mile that doesn't exist. And if you're unlucky enough to drive through it at just the wrong moment, you might find yourself in a place where the road never ends, where the other traffic isn't real, where the mile markers count down to 0 and beyond. She drives that route less often now, takes other assignments when she can, but sometimes there's no choice. Sometimes the load requires I-10, and Jennifer grips the wheel a little tighter, watches the mile markers a little more carefully, and prays that today isn't the day she doesn't come back. Story 3. The Shadow Convoy. Thomas Brennan had been a night driver for 16 years, preferring the empty highways and cool darkness to the chaos of daytime traffic. He specialized in cross-country runs, particularly the long hauls through the Northern Corridor. I-90 from Seattle to Chicago, I-94 through Montana and North Dakota, routes where you could drive for hours seeing nothing but stars and occasional clusters of lights marking small towns. In March of 2021, Thomas picked up what seemed like a routine load in Billings, Montana. Electronics bound for Minneapolis, nothing special, loaded in a standard dry van. He left the warehouse at 10 p.m. on a Thursday night, planning to make Fargo by morning, then push through to Minneapolis by evening Friday. The night was cold and clear, temperature hovering around 15 degrees, the kind of cold that made the air feel sharp and crystalline. I-94 stretched ahead of him, empty and dark, the highway cutting through vast plains of snow-covered nothing. Thomas liked this kind of driving, meditative, peaceful, just him and the road and the steady diesel rumble of his Peterbilt. Around midnight, about 30 miles west of Glendive, he noticed headlights in his mirror. A single truck coming up fast in the left lane. Thomas moved over to let it pass, which it did, and he caught a glimpse of a standard Freightliner pulling what looked like a refrigerated trailer. 10 minutes later, another truck passed him. Same configuration, Freightliner, reefer trailer. Thomas thought nothing of it. Refrigerated goods often moved at night to avoid the heat of day, even in winter. Then a third truck passed. Same make, same configuration. Same blue-tinted headlights. Same absence of any visible company markings on the trailer. Thomas keyed up his CB. This is Nighthawk eastbound on I-94 around mile marker 215. Anybody know what's with the convoy of Freightliners? You guys running together? No response. The CB hissed with empty static. A fourth truck passed him, then a fifth, then a sixth, all identical or so close to identical that Thomas couldn't spot any differences. Same headlights, same mirrors, same exhaust stacks, same trailers. They were spaced about a quarter-mile apart, moving at exactly 80 miles per hour, and none of them responded to his CB calls. By the time the 20th truck passed him, Thomas was genuinely unnerved. This wasn't a normal convoy. Company trucks traveling together usually had CB chatter, had some kind of visual identification, had drivers who would acknowledge a hail on the radio. These trucks moved in perfect silence, one after another, like they were connected by some invisible tether. He tried to speed up, match their pace, thinking maybe he could pull alongside one and see the driver. But when he pushed the Peterbilt to 85, the trucks ahead maintained their exact distance. He couldn't close the gap no matter how fast he went. Then he tried slowing down, thinking he'd let them pass and get away from this strange procession. But as he dropped to 70, then 65, another truck would appear in his mirror, coming up at exactly the speed needed to pass him and merge into the convoy ahead. Thomas was trapped in the middle of them. The trucks kept passing one every minute or so, each one exactly like the last. He started counting. 25, 30, 35, 40 trucks, all identical, all moving in that same eerie silence. He grabbed his phone to call dispatch, but like the CB, it showed no signal. Out here in the middle of Montana, that wasn't entirely unusual, but the timing made his hands shake as he set the phone back down. At mile marker 250, Thomas noticed something that made his skin crawl. The trucks had no license plates. The spaces where plates should be were just blank, smooth metal reflecting his headlights, but no registration information, no state identifiers, nothing to indicate where these vehicles were from or who owned them. He tried to read the dot numbers that were required on commercial vehicles, but where those should have been was just more blank space. These trucks existed in complete anonymity, ghosts on the highway. Then one of them started to slow down. The truck about 400 feet ahead of Thomas. He'd been using it as a reference point, noticing a slight dent in its rear bumper, began to decelerate. Not gradually, like a normal driver easing off the accelerator, but in a jerky, inconsistent way. 65, 78, 62, 83. The speed changes were rapid and random. Thomas moved to pass it in the left lane, but as he pulled alongside, he made the mistake of looking over at the cab. There was no driver. The steering wheel was turning by itself, small corrections to keep the truck centered in its lane, but the seat was empty. The cab interior was dark except for the dashboard lights, and in that faint glow, Thomas could see that the entire cab was empty. No driver, no passenger, no coffee cups or logbooks or any of the personal items that every trucker accumulated. Thomas jerked his eyes back to his own lane, his heart hammering. He'd passed the driverless truck and returned to the right lane, but now he was surrounded by them. One ahead, one behind, and a steady stream in the left lane, all of them moving in their programmed pattern. The CB screamed to life with a sound that wasn't quite static and wasn't quite voices. It was layered, dozens or hundreds of sounds compressed together into a wall of noise that made Thomas's ears ache. He reached for the volume knob, but before he could turn it down, the sound resolved briefly into something like words. "Join us! Join the route! Join the convoy!" Then it dissolved back into incomprehensible noise. The truck behind him was getting closer. Thomas watched in his mirror as it crept forward, closing the distance that had been steady for the past 30 miles. 200 feet, 100 feet, 50 feet. It was right on his bumper now, its blue headlights flooding his cab with cold light. Thomas accelerated, but the truck matched him. He could see it clearly now in his mirrors, could see that it wasn't just empty, it was wrong. The windows weren't reflecting light correctly. The chrome wasn't quite chrome. It was as if someone had created a truck from memory, getting most of the details right but missing some crucial element that would make it real. He tried to change lanes, but there was always another truck beside him, boxing him in. They were coordinating, hurting him, keeping him locked in position. The exit for Glendive appeared, his planned fuel stop. Thomas didn't signal, didn't slow down gradually. He cranked the wheel hard to the right at the last possible second, feeling the truck lean dangerously as he shot across the right lane and onto the exit ramp. The convoy didn't follow. The trucks continued straight on I-94, maintaining their formation, and within seconds they disappeared into the darkness ahead. Thomas rolled down the exit ramp into Glendive with his hands shaking so badly he could barely control the steering wheel. He pulled into the first truck stop he saw, parked, and sat there with the engine running, trying to process what he'd just experienced. After 20 minutes, he climbed down and went into the truck stop. The place was nearly empty, just one other driver at the coffee station and a clerk behind the counter who looked half asleep. "Excuse me," Thomas said to the clerk. "Did you see a convoy come through here? Lot of identical freightliners." The clerk looked at him blankly. "Haven't seen any trucks for about an hour. It's been dead tonight." "That's impossible," Thomas said. "There were dozens of them on I-94. They must have passed by here." The clerk shrugged. "I've been watching the highway. Nobody's gone past." Thomas turned to the other driver. Did you come in off I-94? The man nodded, a weathered guy in his 50s with a caterpillar cap. "Did you see them, the convoy?" The driver's expression changed, wariness replacing casual interest. "See what? The trucks, freightliners, no drivers, they were." "I didn't see anything," the driver said quickly, too quickly. He grabbed his coffee and walked toward the door. Thomas caught his arm. "Please, I need to know I'm not crazy." The driver looked at him for a long moment, then leaned in close. "You saw the shadow convoy. Don't ask me what it is because I don't know. But I've seen it too. 5 years ago, same stretch of highway. Trucks with no drivers moving in formation trying to..." He paused, searching for the right word. "Trying to recruit, I guess. Trying to add more trucks to their number." "What are they?" "I don't know, ghosts maybe, or something worse. There are stories about drivers who disappeared on this route. Just vanished, truck and all. Some people think the convoy is those drivers, still running their routes long after they should have stopped." "How do you know about this?" "Old-timers talk about it. Mostly when they're drunk, mostly when they're about to retire. There are places on the highway that aren't quite right, thin spots where the road touches something else. The shadow convoy runs through those spots. If you see them, you get away from them. You don't let them box you in, don't let them match your speed, because if you do..." The driver trailed off. "What?" "You become one of them, your truck joins the convoy. You disappear from every database, every log, every memory. And you drive forever, following the route, trying to add more trucks to the formation." Thomas felt his stomach drop. "How do you know I'm not already one of them? How do you know I'm real?" The driver smiled grimly. "Because you're scared, because you ran. The shadow drivers don't feel anything anymore. They just drive." Thomas didn't sleep that night. He sat in his truck, watching I-94 through the windshield, and around 3 a.m. he saw them again. The convoy passed by the truck stop, one truck every minute, all of them identical, all of them moving in perfect formation. He counted 67 of them before they disappeared into the darkness. He waited until sunrise to get back on the road, and he drove the rest of the way to Minneapolis in daylight, making excuses to dispatch about a mechanical delay. He delivered his load and immediately requested a different route for his next assignment. But Thomas can't stop thinking about what the driver in Glendive had said, about drivers who disappeared, about trucks that joined the convoy and never came back. He started researching, digging through old trucking forums and accident reports, and he found them. Stories going back decades. Drivers who'd vanished on I-94 through Montana. Trucks that had been reported missing, never found. Dot numbers that showed up in databases but didn't match any known company. The data was fragmented and inconsistent, but the pattern was there if you knew to look for it. The shadow convoy was collecting. Had been collecting for years, maybe decades. And it was still out there, running its route through the Montana night, searching for new trucks to add to its endless formation. Thomas doesn't drive I-94 anymore. He turns down any load that would take him through that corridor. But sometimes on other highways, late at night when traffic is sparse, he sees them in his mirror. A cluster of identical trucks moving in formation, closing in. And he has to speed up, change routes, do whatever it takes to avoid them. Because he knows now that the convoy is patient. It runs its route every night, and eventually every night driver passes through its territory. All it has to do is wait for the right moment, the right conditions, when a driver is tired or distracted or just unlucky. And then it adds another truck to its number. Thomas has started keeping count of the drivers he knows who have gone missing. 5 in the past 2 years, all of them night drivers, all of them running routes through Montana or North Dakota. The official reports say mechanical failures, accidents, drivers who just quit and walked away from the profession. But Thomas knows better. He's seen where they went. He's seen them driving in formation, one truck every minute, running forever through the darkness of I-94, part of a convoy that never stops, never slows, never reaches its destination because it doesn't have one. It just drives, and it's always looking for more. Story 4. The broadcast. Raymond Fisher was hauling westbound on I-40 through the Texas Panhandle in November of 2022 when his AM radio picked up a station that shouldn't have existed. Raymond was old school. He'd been driving since the mid-90s and still preferred AM radio to satellite, liked scanning through the static for distant stations that faded in and out as he drove through the night. The load was fertilizer bound for Albuquerque, and Raymond had left Oklahoma City just after 8 p.m. By midnight, he was deep into the Texas Panhandle, that vast flat expanse where the highway cuts straight through absolute nothing. The nearest town was 40 miles in any direction, and the radio had been searching through empty frequencies for the past half hour. Then, around mile marker 75, he found something. The frequency was 1440 AM, and the signal was strong, much stronger than it should have been out here in the middle of nowhere. No static, no fade, just a clear voice speaking in measured, calm tones. At first, Raymond thought it was a trucker information channel. The voice was giving road conditions, warning about construction on I-40 west of Amarillo, advising caution for black ice on bridges, recommending alternate routes around weather systems. Standard stuff, but as Raymond listened, he realized something was wrong. The locations the voice was describing didn't match current conditions. It mentioned a multi-vehicle accident at mile marker 120 that was blocking 2 lanes. Raymond had passed mile marker 120 30 minutes ago, and there'd been no accident, no flashing lights, no traffic backup. The voice mentioned closures and detours that Raymond hadn't seen. It described whether that wasn't happening. The voice warned of heavy snow near Tucumcari, but the night was clear, stars visible in every direction. Raymond reached for the dial to change the station, but before he could turn it, the voice said his name. Raymond Fisher, driving a 2019 Volvo VNL, dot number 2,847,563, hauling agricultural chemicals westbound on I-40. Current speed 72 miles per hour. Current location mile marker 73. Raymond's hand froze on the dial. The voice had his exact information, down to the dot number on his truck and his precise speed. Raymond, the voice continued, still in that same calm, measured tone, you need to take exit 69 in approximately 3 miles. Leave the interstate and proceed south on Highway 70 for 12 miles. This is not optional. Who is this? Raymond grabbed his CB microphone, as if somehow the radio voice would hear him through a different device. How do you know my information? The AM radio didn't respond to his CB transmission, but the voice continued as if it had heard him. Your cooperation is required. Exit 69, 3 miles. If you do not comply, there will be consequences. Raymond's first instinct was to ignore it. This was obviously some kind of hack, someone scanning truck data and broadcasting it to mess with drivers. Maybe a prank, maybe something more malicious, but definitely not something he needed to obey. He drove past exit 69 without slowing down. The radio was silent for exactly 60 seconds. Then the voice returned, and this time it wasn't calm. It was angry. Raymond Fisher, you were instructed to take exit 69. You did not comply. This is your first violation. There are consequences for violations. Raymond reached for the radio's power button, intending to shut the damn thing off. But before he could press it, every light in his truck went dark. Dashboard, headlights, clearance lights, everything. The engine kept running, but he was suddenly driving blind at 70 miles per hour on a dark highway. He stomped on the brakes, feeling the truck shudder and sway, the trailer trying to jackknife. For 10 seconds that felt like 10 minutes, Raymond fought to control a vehicle he couldn't see, steering by instinct and muscle memory. Then, just as suddenly as they'd gone out, the lights came back on. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. He slowed to 50 miles per hour, hands shaking on the wheel, and the radio voice spoke again. That was a warning. The next violation will be more severe. You will take exit 37. You will proceed east on Highway 54 for 8 miles. You will follow our instructions precisely. Do you understand? Raymond didn't answer. He was watching the highway ahead, looking for anything unusual, any sign of what was happening. But there was nothing, just empty road, empty plains, and the stars above. Raymond Fisher, do you understand? Who are you? Raymond said to the radio, knowing it probably couldn't hear him but needing to say something. What do you want? Compliance, the voice said. Exit 37, east on Highway 54, 8 miles, do not deviate. Raymond's mind was racing. He could refuse again, could keep driving west on I-40, call the police, call his dispatcher, try to get help. But that moment of darkness, of driving blind at highway speed, had terrified him in a way he'd never experienced before. Whatever was controlling his truck's electrical system could do it again, could leave him dark for longer, could cause him to crash. Exit 37 appeared in his headlights. Raymond slowed, still debating, still trying to decide if obeying this voice would be worse than defying it. At the last second, he took the exit. Correct decision, the voice said. Proceed east on Highway 54. The state highway was narrow and dark, barely 2 lanes, cutting through ranchland that looked like it had been empty since the Dust Bowl. No other vehicles, no buildings, no lights except his own. Raymond drove exactly the speed limit, hands tight on the wheel, eyes scanning for any clue about what was happening. In 0.7 miles, you will turn right onto an unmarked road. The turn will be immediately after a cattle guard. What's at the end of this road? Raymond asked, not expecting an answer. Compliance, the voice repeated. Turn right in 0.5 miles. Raymond saw the cattle guard in his headlights, the metal bars set into the pavement to keep livestock from crossing. Immediately after it, barely visible, was a dirt road leading south into the darkness. No sign, no marker, just a gap in the barbed wire fence. Turn now, the voice commanded. Raymond turned. The dirt road was rough, forcing him to slow to 20 miles per hour to keep the truck from bottoming out. The trailer swayed and bounced behind him, and he winced thinking about the fertilizer load shifting inside. Proceed for 3.2 miles. You will see a structure on the left side of the road. Stop at that structure. What structure? What is this? Compliance, the voice said for the 3rd time, and Raymond was starting to hate that word. The dirt road seemed to go on forever, cutting through absolutely nothing. No trees, no buildings, not even power lines. Just flat, empty darkness on all sides. Raymond's GPS had stopped working the moment he left the highway. The screen just showed a blank area with no roads, no landmarks, nothing. Then he saw it. A building, or what had once been a building. In his headlights, it looked like an old service station from the 50s or 60s. A single-story structure with a canopy that had partially collapsed, gas pumps that were just rusted skeletons. The windows were dark and broken, the walls stained with decades of weathering. Stop, the voice commanded. Raymond stopped the truck about 50 feet from the building, keeping the engine running, every instinct telling him to run. The radio was silent now, the AM station gone, replaced by static. He sat there for 5 minutes, waiting, watching the building for any sign of movement. Nothing. The place looked dead, abandoned decades ago. Then his headlights caught something. A figure standing in the doorway of the building. Just standing there, motionless, barely visible in the peripheral edge of the light. Raymond's breath caught. He'd been certain the place was empty, but now there was definitely someone there. Or something. The figure moved, walking forward into the full glare of the headlights, and Raymond saw that it was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned service station uniform. The clothing was wrong, though, faded to the point of being colorless, and it didn't move right, didn't react to the person's movement like fabric should. The figure approached the driver's side of the truck and looked up at Raymond. Its face was the worst part. Not because it was monstrous or obviously inhuman, but because it was almost right. Almost a normal human face, but with something crucial missing. The proportions were slightly off. The expressions didn't quite match what the eyes were doing, and those eyes reflected Raymond's headlights like an animal's eyes, throwing back cold white light. It gestured to Raymond to roll down his window. Every instinct Raymond had screamed at him to drive away, to run, to do anything except comply. But he remembered the lights going out, remembered that moment of blind driving, and his hand moved to the window control. The window rolled down 6 inches, and cold air flooded into the cab. "Raymond Fisher," the figure said, and its voice was exactly the same as the radio voice. Same tone, same cadence, same measured delivery. "You have been selected for cargo verification." "Cargo verification?" Raymond's voice was shaking. "I have my bills of lading. Everything's documented." "Not that cargo." The figure pointed toward the trailer. "Open the rear doors." "I can't do that. The load is sealed. If I break the seal, I violate transport regulations. I lose my certification. "Open the rear doors," the figure repeated, and Raymond's radio erupted with a high-pitched sound that made him cry out and clap his hands over his ears. The sound wasn't just loud. It was physical, a pressure that felt like it was pushing into his skull. It stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving Raymond's ears ringing and his head throbbing. "Compliance," the figure said again. Raymond climbed down from the cab on shaking legs, walked to the rear of the trailer, and broke the seal. The mechanism gave way with a metallic snap that sounded impossibly loud in the silent darkness. He opened the doors, revealing pallets of fertilizer bags, everything exactly as it had been loaded in Oklahoma City. The figure climbed into the trailer with a motion that was too smooth, too fluid. It moved among the pallets, examining them, and Raymond realized it wasn't looking at the fertilizer. It was looking through the pallets, as if it could see through the plastic bags to something beneath or beyond. After 5 minutes of this inspection, the figure climbed down. "Acceptable," it said. "This cargo does not contain what we are searching for." "What are you searching for?" Raymond asked, the question escaping before he could stop himself. The figure's Turong face tilted, examining him with those reflective eyes. "The displacement," it said. "An object that was removed from proper alignment. It creates disturbances. It calls to us. We search every vessel that passes through the affected region until we locate it." "I don't have any displacement." "Just fertilizer." "Correct. You may proceed, close the doors, return to Highway 54, continue west to rejoin I-40. "That's it. You just wanted to check my cargo?" "We check all cargo. Some drivers comply quickly, others resist. Those who resist too strongly become part of the search process." Raymond didn't want to know what that meant. He closed the trailer doors, secured them as best he could without a seal, and climbed back into his cab. The figure was still standing there, watching him with those terrible reflective eyes. He put the truck in gear and started moving, following the dirt road back the way he'd come. In his mirrors, he could see the figure standing motionless, watching him leave, and the abandoned service station behind it. When he reached Highway 54, his GPS flickered back to life, showing his position on a road that it now recognized. The AM radio was playing normal content, a late-night talk show discussing politics. Everything seemed normal again, except Raymond knew it wasn't. He knew that somewhere out here in the Texas Panhandle, there was a broadcast searching for trucks, pulling them off the highway, forcing them to submit to inspections by something that only looked human. He drove straight through to Albuquerque without stopping, delivered his load, and filed a report about the broken seal, claiming it had failed due to temperature stress. The company accepted the explanation without question, but Raymond never drove I-40 through the Texas Panhandle again. He transferred to shorter regional routes, anything that would keep him in populated areas, anywhere that wasn't vast empty spaces where strange broadcasts could reach his radio. He tried to warn other drivers, posted about it on forums, but the responses were either dismissive or troubling. Dismissive from people who thought he'd hallucinated or made it up. Troubling from a small handful of drivers who sent him private messages, telling their own stories of broadcasts that knew too much, voices that commanded compliance, roadside inspections that weren't quite right. One message stuck with him. It came from a driver in Arizona who'd experienced something similar 6 months earlier. The message said, "They're looking for something that was taken, something important, and they won't stop until they find it. Every truck that crosses through certain regions gets checked. Most drivers never remember it. You're lucky you remember, or maybe you're unlucky, because now you know it's real." Raymond doesn't know what the broadcast was or what it was searching for. He doesn't know what would happen to a driver who was actually carrying the displacement, whatever that meant. He doesn't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, he still scans through AM radio frequencies, listening to the static, wondering if he'll hear that voice again. And sometimes in the empty spaces between stations, he thinks he catches fragments of it, calm, measured, commanding compliance. The broadcast is still out there, still searching. And somewhere on I-40 through the Texas Panhandle, trucks are still being pulled off the highway, still being inspected by things that only look human, still being released with fragmentary memories and broken seals. Raymond wonders how many drivers it checks every night. He wonders what happens when it finally finds what it's looking for. And most of all, he wonders what happens to the drivers who resist too strongly, the ones who become part of the search process. He hopes he never finds out. Story 5, The Rest Stop That Moves. Catherine Voss had been a long-haul trucker for 14 years, and she prided herself on her memory for routes and stops. She could navigate most of the major interstates without GPS, knew the location of every decent truck stop, every cheap fuel station, every place with clean bathrooms and good coffee. Her mental map of the American highway system was detailed and reliable, built through thousands of hours behind the wheel. So when a rest stop appeared on I-80 through Nebraska that she'd never seen before, Catherine immediately knew something was wrong. It was May of 2023, a warm Tuesday evening with clear skies and light traffic. Catherine was hauling electronics westbound from Chicago to Salt Lake City, a route she'd driven at least 50 times. She knew every mile of I-80 through Nebraska, knew exactly where the rest areas were located, knew their amenities and their usual traffic patterns. This rest stop shouldn't exist. She just passed Lexington, approaching mile marker 238 when she saw the sign, "Rest area 2 miles, all vehicles welcome." The sign itself was unusual. Rest areas didn't typically advertise "all vehicles welcome," it was assumed. But what really bothered Catherine was the location. There was no rest area at mile marker 240. The nearest official rest area was 30 miles ahead near Gothenburg, but she needed to stop. She'd been driving for 6 hours straight, and her electronic logs were getting close to the limit that would trigger a mandatory break. Might as well check it out, she thought. Maybe they'd built a new one and she'd somehow missed the memo. The rest area appeared on schedule, exactly at mile marker 240. In the evening light, it looked modern and well-maintained. A new-looking brick building with large windows, extensive parking areas for both cars and trucks, even a small playground visible beside the main structure. Solar panels on the roof, landscaping that included actual trees, unusual for this part of Nebraska. Catherine pulled into the truck parking section, which was about half full. 6 or 7 other semis parked in neat rows. She found a spot, set her parking brake, and filled out her logbook. Everything seemed normal. The building's interior was impressively nice. Clean tiled floors, modern fixtures, vending machines that looked brand new, even a small coffee station with one of those expensive automated espresso machines. Too nice, Catherine's instincts told her. Way too nice for a Nebraska rest stop. There were other people inside. A couple with 2 kids at a table eating sandwiches, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a younger woman at the coffee station. Normal rest stop crowd. Catherine used the bathroom, got a coffee from the machine, and was walking back toward her truck when she noticed something odd. One of the other trucks in the lot had been there when she arrived. A red Kenworth hauling a flatbed loaded with construction equipment. She'd noticed it specifically because the load was chained down in a configuration she'd never seen before, crisscrossing chains that seemed excessive. That truck was now parked 3 spaces over from where it had been. Catherine stopped, coffee cup halfway to her lips, and stared. She was certain, absolutely certain, that the Kenworth had been in space 14. Now it was in space 11, and she hadn't heard it start up, hadn't heard it move. She glanced at the other trucks. They all seemed to be in the same positions they'd been in before, but now she wasn't sure. Had the blue Volvo been quite that close to the building? Had the white Freightliner been angled exactly that way? Telling herself she was being paranoid, Catherine walked to her own truck and climbed into the cab. She'd finish her coffee, take the mandatory 30-minute break, then get back on the road. But as she sat there, she kept watching the other trucks through her mirrors. Nothing moved for 5 minutes. Then, while she was looking away to take a sip of coffee, something changed. When she looked back, the blue Volvo was in a different spot. Not dramatically different, it had been in space 7, now it was in space 6. But it had moved while she wasn't watching, and again, she'd heard nothing. Catherine's unease was rapidly shifting to fear. She started her engine, intending to leave immediately, brake or no brake. But when she released the parking brake and tried to put the truck in gear, the transmission wouldn't engage. The shifter moved freely, but nothing happened. The engine ran normally, all the dashboard indicators showed green, but the truck simply wouldn't move. She tried for 5 minutes, running through every troubleshooting step she knew, but the result was the same. The truck was stuck. Catherine climbed down, thinking she'd check underneath for some kind of mechanical failure, and that's when she noticed the pavement. The parking spaces were marked with painted lines like any parking lot, but the lines were wrong. Not badly painted or faded, wrong in a more fundamental way. They didn't maintain consistent width. They curved slightly where they should be straight. And if Catherine looked at them from the corner of her eye, they seemed to move, like optical illusions on a barroom floor. She looked at the building. In the growing twilight, its windows were lit from inside, and she could see the people she'd seen earlier. The couple with the kids, the elderly man with his newspaper, the young woman. They were in exactly the same positions they'd been in 20 minutes ago. Same table, same seats, same poses. The kids hadn't moved. The man was still reading the same page of his newspaper. The woman still stood at the coffee station. Catherine walked toward the building, slowly, watching the windows. As she got closer, she could see that the people weren't quite right. Their movements were too subtle or too repetitive. The kids weren't fidgeting the way real children would. The man never turned the page of his newspaper. And the woman at the coffee station was holding a cup to her lips, but Catherine never saw her actually drink. She reached the door and pressed her face against the glass. The interior looked exactly as it had before, clean, modern, well-lit. But now she could see details she'd missed. The vending machines had no electrical cords. The coffee station's espresso machine had no water line. The tables were bolted to the floor in a pattern that made no sense, too close together, angled in ways that would make it difficult for people to sit at them comfortably. And the people inside were completely still now, not moving at all, frozen in their poses like department store mannequins. Catherine backed away from the building, her heart racing. She turned to run back to her truck and found herself facing something impossible. The parking lot had changed. The trucks were in completely different positions now, and there were more of them. At least 20 rigs filling spaces that had been empty before. Her own truck was now on the far side of the lot, at least 200 feet away. She ran toward it, and the pavement seemed to stretch, the distance growing rather than shrinking. She was running hard, her boots slapping the asphalt, but her truck wasn't getting closer. If anything, it was receding. Catherine stopped, breathing hard, trying to think through her panic. This place wasn't real. Or it was real in some wrong way, operating by rules that didn't match normal reality. The trucks moving when she wasn't looking. The people frozen inside. The distances that wouldn't stay consistent. She pulled out her phone, hoping to call for help, but the screen showed no signal. Worse, the time display was wrong. It read 8:47 p.m., but Catherine knew it should be around 7:15. She'd stopped at the rest area just after 7, had been inside for maybe 15 minutes, and it was now full dark outside, which didn't match Nebraska in May. A voice spoke behind her. "You're new." Catherine spun around. One of the frozen people from inside the building was standing there, the young woman from the coffee station. Up close, she looked more real, but there was still something subtly wrong about her. Her clothing didn't quite hang right. Her face was almost expressive, but not quite. "What is this place?" Catherine demanded. "Rest area," the woman said. "Place to stop, place to pause." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you'll understand. This place exists between destinations, between motion and stillness. Trucks come here to rest. My truck won't move, I need to leave." The woman's face attempted something like sympathy, but didn't quite achieve it. "Some trucks leave, some trucks stay. It depends on what they're carrying. I'm hauling electronics, computer parts, nothing special. Not that cargo." The woman gestured vaguely at the trucks filling the lot. "The other cargo, the things drivers carry with them, memories. Destinations, purpose. This place feeds on those, takes them, uses them, leaves the trucks empty." Catherine looked at the trucks more carefully now. She could see drivers in some of the cabs, sitting motionless behind the wheels, staring forward. Not moving, not reacting, just sitting there in the darkness. "How long have they been here?" she whispered. "Time doesn't work right here. Could be hours, could be years. They're still driving in their minds, still running their routes. But their bodies are here and their trucks are here, and eventually there won't be enough of them left to remember they were ever somewhere else." "How do I leave?" The woman's attempted expression might have been sadness. "I don't know. I don't remember. I was a driver once, I think. Stopped here, became part of it. Now I'm just scenery, background. A rest area needs people, so that's what I am now." Catherine backed away from the woman, looking for any exit, any way out of this impossible parking lot. The highway should be right there, just beyond the edge of the pavement, but when she reached what should have been the exit ramp, it just curved back into the parking lot. The rest area was a closed system, a loop, a trap. She ran back to her truck, dodging between other rigs, and this time the distance stayed consistent. She reached her cab and climbed inside, slamming the door, locking it, as if physical locks could protect her from whatever this place was. The key was still in the ignition. She turned it, and the engine that had been idling roared to life properly. The transmission engaged with a solid clunk when she put it in gear. She could move now. Catherine didn't question it. She just drove, heading toward where the exit should be, where she remembered it being when she first arrived. The other trucks didn't move to block her. The pavement stayed solid beneath her tires. And then, suddenly, she was on the exit ramp, pulling back onto I-80, and the rest area was disappearing in her mirrors. She drove 50 miles before she allowed herself to slow down, before she let herself breathe normally. The mile markers passed in their proper sequence: 241, 242, 243. Her GPS showed her exact position. Her phone had full signal again, the time reading 7:27 p.m., which was impossible because she'd been at the rest area for at least 30 minutes. But she wasn't going to question anything that meant she was back in the real world. Catherine never filed a report about what happened. Who would believe her? Instead, she started researching, digging through old trucking forums and accident reports, looking for anything that matched her experience. She found stories. Not many, but enough. Drivers who talked about rest stops that weren't on any maps, parking lots where trucks moved when you weren't watching, buildings full of people who never quite looked right, and drivers who disappeared, their trucks found abandoned at rest areas with no sign of where they'd gone. One post from 2019 stuck with her. A driver claimed he'd stopped at a rest area on I-80 in Nebraska and couldn't leave for 3 days. He said time had looped, that he'd watched the sun set and rise and set again without progressing, that other trucks came and went, but he remained trapped. He'd finally escaped by deliberately crashing his truck through what looked like a solid barrier, and it had turned out to be just painted canvas. The post had been dismissed as a mental health crisis. The driver had been mandated for psychological evaluation and eventually lost his CDL. But Catherine believed him now, because she knew the truth. That somewhere on I-80, probably at mile marker 240, but possibly at other locations, possibly moving to different spots, there was a rest area that existed in the wrong way. A place that collected trucks and drivers, that fed on destinations and purpose, that turned people into frozen scenery for its impossible interior. She drives I-80 still, because it's her route, her livelihood. But she never stops at rest areas in Nebraska anymore. She pushes through, ignoring her logs when she has to, risking violations, because any penalty is better than stopping at a place that might not let her leave. And sometimes, late at night, she sees it in the distance. A rest area at mile marker 240, or 315, or 197, or wherever it's decided to appear. She sees the sign advertising that all vehicles are welcome. She sees the lights of the building, sees trucks in the parking lot, sees the shape of people moving behind the windows. She keeps driving, always keeps driving, because she knows what happens to drivers who stop. They rest. Forever. Story 6. The cargo that WATCHED. Daniel Rothman had hauled some strange loads in his 19 years as a trucker. Radioactive medical isotopes with hazmat placards and Geiger counters. Live animals making sounds all night in the trailer. Once, memorably, a load of mannequins that he swore he could hear moving around during stops. But nothing compared to what he picked up in Savannah, Georgia, on a cold January night in 2022. The load had come through his dispatcher as a rush job. High priority, premium pay, delivered to Seattle in 5 days with minimal stops. The manifest was vague. Industrial equipment, fragile temperature controlled. The shipping company was one Daniel had never heard of, but the money was excellent, and he needed an excuse to get out of the Southeast anyway. The warehouse in Savannah was in an industrial area that looked half abandoned. Most of the buildings were dark, windows boarded up, weeds growing through cracks in the parking lots. But the address he'd been given was lit up bright, with 3 loading bays active and people moving around with forklifts. Daniel backed his truck up to Bay 2 as directed, and workers immediately started loading. He tried to see what they were bringing in. Good practice to know your cargo in case something shifted during transit. But the lighting was wrong, angles were off, and he couldn't get a clear view of anything except that the items were large, rectangular, and wrapped in heavy black plastic. The supervisor, a thin man with nervous energy and eyes that wouldn't quite meet Daniel's, had him sign paperwork without really explaining anything. Temperature needs to stay between 55 and 60 degrees, not negotiable. If it gets outside that range, you call this number immediately. He handed Daniel a card with just a phone number, no company name, no other information. What happens if the temperature gets wrong? Daniel asked. You call the number, the supervisor repeated and walked away. Daniel checked the trailer temperature controls, set them to 57 degrees, locked the doors, and started driving. The trailer was fully loaded. He could feel the weight in how the truck handled, but the manifest claimed only 12,000 pounds, which didn't match the feel at all. It felt closer to 30,000. He made it to Atlanta before the first strange thing happened. Daniel stopped at a truck stop to fuel up and check the trailer temperature. Everything read normal, 57 degrees, exactly where it should be. But when he walked around the trailer, he heard something, breathing. Not mechanical sounds, not the hiss of the refrigeration unit or the creak of metal expanding and contracting. Breathing. Deep, slow, rhythmic breathing, like something large was sleeping inside the trailer. Daniel pressed his ear against the side of the trailer, listening. The breathing continued, uneven now, with occasional hitches and pauses. Then, as he listened, he heard something else. Movement. Not things shifting from road vibration. This was deliberate movement, something walking or crawling inside the trailer. He grabbed his phone and called the number the supervisor had given him. It rang 7 times before someone picked up. Number, a voice said. Not hello or how can I help you, just number. This is Daniel Rothman, driver ID 847,392. I'm hauling your load from Savannah to Seattle, and I'm hearing sounds from inside the trailer. Movement sounds. Silence for several seconds. Then, is the temperature correct? Yes, 57 degrees exactly. Then there is no problem, continue to destination. But I'm hearing, the line went dead. Daniel stood in the truck stop parking lot, phone in hand, listening to the breathing sounds coming from his trailer. Every instinct he had told him to open the doors, look inside, see what he was really hauling. But he'd signed a contract, taken the premium pay, and opening the trailer would violate the terms. He got back in his truck and kept driving. By the time he reached Little Rock, Daniel was certain that something in the trailer was aware of him. He could feel it. Not a sound or a sight, but a presence, a consciousness pressing against the back of his mind. When he stopped at traffic lights, he found himself glancing in the mirrors at the trailer, as if expecting to see something looking back at him. The breathing sounds continued, audible whenever he was outside the truck. Sometimes they seemed to match his own breathing, which terrified him in a way he couldn't articulate. Sometimes they would pause for minutes at a time, and those pauses were somehow worse than the breathing itself. In Oklahoma City, Daniel stopped for his mandatory rest period. He parked at a large truck stop, ate a meal he barely tasted, and climbed into his sleeper berth. He set his alarm for 8 hours and tried to sleep. He woke up after 3 hours to the feeling that something was watching him. The sleeper berth was dark except for the faint glow of instrument lights from the cab. Daniel lay still, not sure what had woken him, just knowing that something was wrong. The air felt thick, harder to breathe, and there was a smell, something organic and wrong, like meat that had been left out too long. He turned on the overhead light, and for just a moment, less than a second, he saw something in the cab with him. A shape in the passenger seat, humanoid but not human, with proportions that didn't match any living thing he knew. Then the light finished flickering on and the seat was empty, but the impression remained. Daniel had seen it. Something tall and thin, with too many joints in the arms and a head that was the wrong shape. Something that had been sitting there watching him sleep. He didn't sleep again that night. He drove through Oklahoma and into the Texas Panhandle, pushing his hours to the legal limit and beyond, wanting to get this load delivered and be done with it. The breathing from the trailer grew louder, and now sometimes he heard other sounds. Scratching, the sound of something dragging across metal. Once, a sound that might have been language, but in no tongue Daniel recognized. In Albuquerque, he called the number again. "The sounds are getting worse," he said when the voice answered. "Whatever's in this trailer, it's active, it's moving. I think it's trying to get out." "Is the temperature correct?" Daniel checked the gauge on the trailer's refrigeration unit. "Yes, 57 degrees. Then continue to destination. You have 53 hours remaining to make delivery. Do not be late." "What am I hauling? What is this cargo?" "Continue to destination," the voice said and hung up. Daniel sat in his truck, hands shaking, trying to decide what to do. He could abandon the load, walk away, report the truck stolen, or claim mechanical failure. But that would mean legal trouble, possibly losing his CDL, definitely losing the $10,000 in premium pay he'd been promised. He kept driving. Somewhere in Arizona, in the middle of the night on an empty stretch of I-40, Daniel's headlights caught something in the road ahead. A figure standing in the right lane facing his truck. Daniel swerved to avoid it, but as he passed, he got a clear look in his mirrors. It was one of the things from his trailer. He was certain of it. The same impossible proportions, the same wrong shape. It stood in the road watching his truck pass, and then it was gone, as if it had never been there. Daniel realized with creeping horror that the cargo wasn't confined to the trailer. It was leaking out somehow, manifesting in the world around him. The things he was hauling could exist outside their container, at least temporarily, at least in some limited way. He drove faster, pushing the truck hard, ignoring speed limits. He had to get to Seattle, had to deliver this load and be free of it. In Northern California, the truck's electrical system started having problems. Lights would flicker. The radio would turn on by itself, cycling through stations too fast to follow. The GPS would show his position jumping around randomly. One moment on I-5, the next on side roads he wasn't driving, the next in the middle of empty terrain. Daniel called the number again, and this time the voice seemed to be expecting him. "You are 12 hours from destination. The cargo is becoming unstable. You must maintain the temperature exactly. Any deviation will result in complete manifestation." Complete manifestation. What does that mean? The cargo must remain dormant until delivery. If it fully manifests during transport, you will not survive. Neither will anyone within approximately 50 miles. Maintain the temperature, reach the destination. You will be compensated. The line went dead. Daniel checked the trailer temperature. 57 degrees, still holding, but the gauge seemed to be flickering now, the numbers jumping slightly. 57, 56, 58, 57. He didn't stop for the rest of the drive. He pushed straight through California and into Oregon, barely slowing for traffic, running on coffee and fear. The sounds from the trailer were constant now, breathing and movement and that almost language. Sometimes he would see shapes in his mirrors, shadows that didn't match any physical object. The final 5 hours into Seattle were the worst. The trailer temperature started to fluctuate more dramatically. 59 degrees, 55, 61. Daniel kept adjusting the refrigeration unit, fighting to keep it in range, but something was working against him. The unit would rev up, blast cold air, then suddenly cut back as if something was interfering with its controls. He crossed into Washington State with the temperature at 63 degrees and climbing. The voice had said maintain the temperature, had said complete manifestation would be deadly. Daniel floored the accelerator, pushing the truck to 90 miles per hour. The trailer swayed dangerously behind him, but he didn't care. He had to reach Seattle, had to deliver this cargo before it reached whatever threshold would let it fully emerge. The delivery address was in the industrial district south of Seattle, another anonymous warehouse. Daniel pulled in with the temperature gauge reading 65 degrees and still climbing. He backed up to the loading bay, and people in hazmat suits immediately swarmed the trailer. They worked fast, disconnecting the refrigeration unit, opening the doors, pulling out the wrapped items. Daniel saw them clearly now, rectangular boxes, each about 8 feet long and 3 feet wide and deep. Coffins, he realized. They were shaped exactly like coffins, but the sounds were coming from all of them. Breathing, movement, that terrible almost language. The things inside were active, aware, trying to get out. The supervisor from Savannah was there, still nervous, still avoiding eye contact. He handed Daniel an envelope thick with cash. "Your contract is complete. The paperwork you signed includes a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. You will not discuss this cargo with anyone. You will not investigate what you transported. You will accept the payment and forget this job happened." What were they? Daniel couldn't help asking. What was in those boxes? The supervisor looked at him for the first time, and his eyes were full of something that might have been pity. "You don't want to know, trust me. You really don't want to know, take the money, go home. Forget you made this run." Daniel took the envelope and left. He drove his empty truck to a hotel, parked, and sat in the room counting the cash. $20,000, double what he'd been promised. Blood money, he thought. Payment for not asking questions, for not looking too closely, for hauling something that should never have been transported. He tried to forget, Tried to go back to normal loads, normal routes, normal life, but it didn't work. Because Daniel had seen them now. Had seen that things exist that shouldn't exist, that there are cargoes being moved that defy understanding, that somewhere in the world there are warehouses and facilities dealing with materials that don't belong in reality. And sometimes, late at night, he still hears the breathing, not from any external source, but inside his mind, as if something from that cargo had attached itself to him during the transport. As if by hauling it across the country, he'd become connected to it in some way he didn't understand. He doesn't take rush jobs anymore, doesn't haul for companies he hasn't researched thoroughly, and he never, ever hauls anything that requires precise temperature control. Because Daniel knows now what happens when the temperature gets outside the specified range. He knows what complete manifestation means, and he knows that he was lucky, or the cargo was still weak enough that it stayed contained until delivery. But he wonders about other drivers, about other loads moving through the night, across highways, through cities, past people who have no idea what's passing them. He wonders how many shipments are like the one he hauled, how many things are being transported that would be catastrophic if they escaped their containment. The money is still under his mattress. He won't spend it, won't deposit it, won't acknowledge it exists. Because using that money would mean accepting what he did, would mean profiting from transporting something that part of him knows should never have been moved. Sometimes he drives past warehouses late at night and sees lights on, sees trucks loading or unloading, and he wonders what they're carrying, wonders if the drivers know, wonders if there are others like him, trapped by their need for money and their fear of consequences into hauling cargo that watches, that breathes, that waits for the temperature to rise just a few degrees too high. He'll never know for sure. And maybe that's better, because knowing would mean accepting that this is normal, that this happens regularly, that the highways are full of trucks carrying things that shouldn't exist. Daniel drives past those warehouses and doesn't stop, and he tries not to listen to the breathing that sometimes still echoes in his mind. Story 7, The Eternal Traffic Jam. Lawrence Hendricks was hauling southbound on I-95 through Virginia in August of 2021. When he encountered a traffic jam that had no beginning and no end. Lawrence had been driving the East Coast corridor for 12 years, knew I-95 like most people knew their own neighborhood. He'd dealt with countless traffic jams, accidents, construction, holiday backups that stretched for miles. He knew the patterns, knew the rhythms, knew approximately how long any given jam would last. This one was different. It started around mile marker 130 just south of Fredericksburg. Lawrence saw the brake lights ahead around 4 p.m., a wall of red stretching forward as far as he could see. Traffic slowed to a crawl, then stopped completely. Normal enough for I-95, especially on a Friday afternoon. Lawrence settled in to wait, using the time to update his logs and check his messages. He was hauling paper products to Jacksonville, not time-sensitive, so a few hours of delay wouldn't matter. The truckers around him were doing the same, engines idling, drivers visible in their cabs, the normal scene of a highway traffic jam. After 30 minutes without moving at all, Lawrence started paying attention to his surroundings. He was boxed in, a Honda Accord directly in front of him, a pickup truck behind, a minivan to his left in the adjacent lane. Normal traffic composition, but something bothered him. The Honda Accord had a bumper sticker that said, "Virginia is for lovers," and a dent in the rear left panel. The pickup was a blue Ford F-150 with tool boxes in the bed. The minivan was white with a child safety seat visible in the back. Lawrence noticed these details because he'd been staring at these vehicles for half an hour without any of them moving. Then he realized he'd been staring at these exact same vehicles for longer than half an hour. He was certain he'd seen them when he first entered the traffic jam. The Honda had been directly in front of him from the moment traffic stopped, which was odd because usually traffic jams involved creeping movement, people changing lanes, the composition of surrounding vehicles shifting gradually. Lawrence grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Southern Freight southbound I-95 at mile marker 130. Anybody know what's causing this backup?" The CB was full of chatter, which was normal for a major traffic jam. Dozens of drivers asking the same questions, sharing information, complaining about the delay. "Heard it was an accident up ahead," someone said. "No, it's construction," another voice countered. "They've got lanes closed." "I heard overturned truck," a third voice added. The answers were contradictory and vague. Lawrence listened for a few more minutes and realized something strange. The voices on the CB were repeating. The same conversations in the same order with the same words. Every 5 minutes or so, the chatter would reset and play through the same sequence again. He checked his phone for traffic information, but the mapping app was acting strangely. It showed his position on I-95, but the traffic visualization was glitching, displaying red, stopped traffic stretching infinitely in both directions. According to the app, there was no end to the jam, no clear section of road ahead or behind. An hour passed, then two. The vehicles around Lawrence didn't move at all. He watched the Honda Accord's driver, a middle-aged woman who kept checking her watch and looking at her phone. She performed this action in the exact same way, at the exact same intervals, as if she were on a loop. Lawrence climbed down from his truck, thinking he'd walk ahead and see if he could spot the cause of the jam. But when his feet hit the pavement, he felt a strange resistance, like the air itself was thicker. Moving forward took effort, as if he were walking through water. He walked past the Honda Accord, past the next truck, past a cluster of passenger cars. The drivers were all visible in their vehicles, all showing signs of frustration or boredom or resignation. But none of them acknowledged him. He waved at a few and they didn't respond. It was as if he were invisible to them. Lawrence walked for what felt like a quarter mile, passing hundreds of stopped vehicles, and the traffic jam never changed. Every vehicle was stopped, every driver trapped in their cab or car, and there was no visible cause for the backup. No accident debris, no construction equipment, no police cars or emergency vehicles. Just an infinite line of stopped traffic. He turned around to walk back to his truck and couldn't find it. Every truck looked similar, rows of semis and trailers stretching in both directions. But his specific Freightliner with its distinctive faded paint on the cab wasn't anywhere he could see. Panic began to set in. Lawrence walked faster, checking every truck, looking for his dot numbers, his company logo. But the trucks all blurred together, and the more he looked, the more certain he became that they were all identical. Not similar, identical. Same make, same model, same trailers, as if someone had copied a single truck thousands of times. He reached what should have been his original position. He'd counted his steps, knew approximately how far he'd walked, but his truck wasn't there. Instead, there was another Freightliner that could have been his but wasn't quite right. The paint wasn't as faded. The mirror angle was wrong. Lawrence climbed up to check the cab and found it empty. No logbook, no personal items, no indication that anyone had been driving it. Just an empty cab with the key in the ignition and the engine running. He ran then, moving from truck to truck, checking each one, finding them all empty or occupied by drivers who wouldn't respond to him. The passenger cars were the same, some empty, some with people inside who sat motionless, staring forward or at their phones, locked in their moment of waiting. Lawrence's CB radio chirped on his belt. He'd taken it with him out of habit, and now a voice was coming through. Southern Freight respond, Lawrence Hendricks respond. He grabbed the radio. This is Lawrence Hendricks, who is this? Lawrence, you need to get back in your truck. You need to stop walking. You're making it worse. Making what worse? Who is this? The jam feeds on attention, the voice said. The more you notice it, the more you try to understand it, the stronger it gets. You need to get back in your truck and stop thinking about the traffic. I can't find my truck. I can't find anything. Where am I? You're still on I-95. You never left. But you're in the deep part now, the part that most drivers pass through without noticing. You stopped at the wrong moment, paid attention at the wrong time, and now you're stuck. Lawrence stopped walking and looked around. The traffic stretched in every direction, hundreds or thousands of vehicles, all stopped, all waiting. And he realized the voice was right. This wasn't a normal traffic jam. This was something else, something that existed because of the traffic jam, that fed on the frustration and boredom and trapped attention of every driver who'd ever been stuck in stopped traffic. How do I get out? He asked. Stop noticing. Stop paying attention. Get in any truck, doesn't have to be yours, and just sit there. Don't look at the other vehicles. Don't think about the jam. Don't wonder when it will end. Just exist in the moment without questioning it. Eventually, traffic will start moving again and you'll move with it. That doesn't make sense. Nothing about this makes sense, the voice said. But sense isn't what you need right now. Trust is what you need. Trust that the traffic will move. Stop trying to understand why it stopped. The radio went silent. Lawrence found the nearest truck, one of those identical Freightliners, and climbed into the cab. He sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, and tried not to think about anything. Tried not to wonder about the traffic jam, not to question where he was or how he'd gotten there. It was almost impossible. His mind kept circling back to the same questions. What caused the jam? How long had he been here? Where was his original truck? Why were all the vehicles identical? But every time those thoughts started to form, he pushed them away. He focused on breathing, on the feel of the steering wheel under his hands, on the sound of the engine idling. He existed in the present moment without wondering about the past or the future. Time stopped having meaning. Lawrence sat in that truck for what might have been minutes or hours or days. The light outside never changed. It stayed the same late afternoon amber, as if the sun had been frozen in place. His body didn't get hungry or thirsty or tired. He just sat, being present, not questioning. And then, without warning or apparent cause, traffic started moving. The Honda Accord ahead of him rolled forward. Lawrence put the truck in gear and followed, maintaining a safe distance. The traffic flowed smoothly now, accelerating gradually from stop to 20 miles per hour to 40 to the normal highway speed of 70. Lawrence drove for 5 miles before he dared to look around. The traffic was normal now, regular composition of vehicles, different makes and models, drivers visible and active. He passed mile marker 135, then 140, and everything seemed real and present and correct. He checked his mirrors and saw his trailer behind him. His actual trailer with his cargo of paper products. He checked the cab and found his logbook, his personal items, everything exactly where it should be. According to his electronic logs, he'd been stopped for 18 minutes. Just 18 minutes of delay, barely worth noting. But Lawrence knew he'd been gone longer, much longer. He'd walked among thousands of stopped vehicles, had spent an indefinite period sitting in a strange truck trying not to think, had existed in a place where traffic jams became permanent and the normal flow of highway time stopped applying. He didn't file a report. What would he say? He'd gotten stuck in traffic and experienced something impossible. No one would believe him. Hell, he barely believed it himself. But Lawrence watches traffic jams differently now. When he sees brake lights ahead, when traffic slows and stops, he's very careful not to pay too much attention. He doesn't study the vehicles around him, doesn't memorize details, doesn't fixate on the delay, because he knows now that traffic jams can become self-sustaining. That if enough attention and frustration and trapped energy gets concentrated in one place, it can create a kind of eddy in the normal flow of the highway. A place where time loops, where vehicles repeat, where drivers can become trapped in an eternal moment of waiting. He's seen signs of it since then. Sometimes, stuck in traffic, he'll notice that the vehicle ahead of him is identical to one 3 cars up. Or he'll hear the same CB chatter repeating. Or he'll feel that strange thickness in the air, that resistance to movement. When he notices these signs, he immediately stops noticing. Looks away, thinks about something else, refuses to engage with the anomaly. And usually within a few minutes, traffic starts moving again. But he wonders about the drivers who don't stop noticing. The ones who pay too much attention, who try too hard to understand what's happening. He wonders if they're still there, trapped in that eternal jam, waiting for traffic to move while time loops around them infinitely. He's tried to warn other drivers, posted vaguely about it on forums, mentioned it in casual conversation at truck stops. But everyone thinks he's talking about normal traffic jams, about the frustration of being stuck on the highway. They don't understand that some traffic jams are more than temporary delays, that some become permanent features of the highway, existing in a parallel state where time doesn't progress and the normal flow of travel stops applying. Lawrence drives I-95 less often now, takes other routes when possible, even if they add time or miles, because he knows the eternal traffic jam is still there, somewhere between Fredericksburg and Richmond, waiting for drivers who notice it too much, who question it too deeply. It's still there, still collecting vehicles, still trapping drivers in its endless moment of stopped traffic. And Lawrence knows that someday he might encounter it again. Might stop at the wrong time, notice the wrong details, and find himself unable to escape the loop. So he drives carefully, watches the road ahead. And when he sees brake lights, he stays calm, stays present, and most importantly, doesn't pay too much attention to what's around him. Because the eternal traffic jam feeds on attention. And Lawrence has given it enough already. Story 8. The faceless hitchhiker. Carolyn Mitchell had a firm policy against picking up hitchhikers, a policy she'd maintained rigorously throughout her 20 years as a long-haul trucker. She'd heard the stories, everyone in the business had, about drivers who'd picked up strangers and regretted it. Robberies, assaults, worse things. The highway was full of desperate people and predators, and Carolyn was too smart to take chances. But on a freezing February night in 2023, driving through northern Montana on Highway 2. She broke her rule. The figure appeared in her headlights around 2 a.m., standing on the shoulder of the highway in a stretch of road that had nothing around it for 50 miles in any direction. Just standing there in the brutal cold, wearing only jeans and a light jacket, arm extended in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker requesting a ride. Carolyn's first instinct was to drive past, but something made her slow down. The temperature outside was 12 degrees below zero, with wind chill pushing it even lower. Anyone standing outside in this weather without proper clothing would develop hypothermia in minutes. This person would be dead within an hour if someone didn't help. Against every instinct and rule she had, Carolyn pulled over. She kept her truck running and climbed down from the cab, walking back toward the figure. As she got closer, she called out, "You need help, you're gonna freeze out here." The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there with its arm extended. Carolyn got closer and felt the first spike of unease. Something was wrong with the hitchhiker's proportions. The arms were slightly too long. The posture was too rigid. And as she approached from the side, she realized she couldn't see the person's face. Not because it was dark, her truck's lights were bright enough, but because the face seemed to be absent. Smooth where features should be, like looking at an unfinished mannequin. She stopped walking. "Hello?" The figure turned toward her, and Carolyn saw what should have been a face but wasn't. The head was the right shape, but it had no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a smooth, flesh-colored surface that reflected her truck's lights like porcelain. Carolyn backed away, her heart hammering. This wasn't a person, couldn't be a person. But it was moving now, lowering its arm, turning its body to fully face her. Moving with jerky, unnatural motions, like something that had learned to imitate human movement without understanding the mechanics of it. She ran back to her truck, climbed into the cab, and locked the doors. Through the windshield, she could see the figure still standing there, now facing her truck directly. She put the truck in gear and started to pull away, glancing in her mirror one last time. The figure was gone, just gone like it had never been there. The empty highway stretched behind her, no sign of any person or any disturbance in the snow. Carolyn drove faster, trying to convince herself she'd hallucinated. The cold, the late hour, the isolation, all of it could create conditions for seeing things that weren't there. She'd heard stories about highway hypnosis, about tired drivers experiencing hallucinations. That had to be what happened. But 5 miles down the road, she saw the figure again. Same place, standing on the shoulder, arm extended. Except she'd just driven this section of highway, and it hadn't been there before. Carolyn drove past without slowing, and the figure tracked her movement, its faceless head turning to follow her truck. She watched in her mirror as it remained in place, arm still extended, until darkness swallowed it. This happened 3 more times over the next 20 miles. Each time the figure appeared ahead of her, always in the same pose, always with that terrible absence where its face should be. And each time she passed it, it would track her movement, then disappear. Carolyn grabbed her CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Wolverine Express eastbound on Highway 2 around mile marker 340. Is anybody else seeing the hitchhiker, the one with no face?" The CB hissed with empty static for several seconds. Then a voice responded, old and gravelly. "You saw it, the faceless one?" "Yes." "What is it?" "Old ghost of Highway 2, the voice said. "Been here longer than I've been driving, and I've been on this road 40 years. Nobody knows what it is. Doesn't hurt anybody, just stands there asking for rides it can't take. I saw it 5 times. It keeps appearing ahead of me. It'll do that. Testing you maybe, or just trying to understand what you are. Best thing is to ignore it. Don't stop, don't acknowledge it, don't pick it up no matter how desperate it seems." "What happens if you pick it up?" The old voice was silent for a long moment. "Then don't know for sure. Never met anybody who actually did it. But there are stories about drivers who stop to help, and they say the hitchhiker gets in the truck and just sits there. Doesn't talk, doesn't move, doesn't do anything. Just sits in the passenger seat with its no face pointed forward, and the driver can't get rid of it, can't make it leave, drives for days or weeks with that thing sitting beside them until they finally can't take it anymore. What happens then? Depends on the story. Some say the driver goes crazy, crashes their truck. Some say they just disappear, truck found abandoned with no sign of where they went. And some say they become like the hitchhiker, faceless things standing on the side of the highway trying to get other drivers to stop. Carolyn felt ice forming in her stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. How do I make it stop appearing? You don't. It's part of this road now. You just keep driving, keep ignoring it, and eventually you'll get clear of its territory. Another 50 miles or so, you'll be past where it roams." The voice was right. The faceless hitchhiker appeared 7 more times over the next hour, always ahead of Carolyn, always in that same pose. But she kept driving, refused to slow down, refused to acknowledge its presence beyond the minimum attention needed to know it was there. And then, around mile marker 390, it appeared in a different configuration. It was standing in the middle of the highway, both arms extended, blocking her lane. Carolyn had a split second to decide, swerve around it or hit it. She swerved, feeling the truck lean dangerously, the trailer swaying. She missed the figure by inches, caught a glimpse of it in her peripheral vision as she passed. This close, she could see details that made her stomach turn. It wasn't that the face was missing. It was that the face was there but covered by skin. She could see the suggestion of features underneath, like someone had pulled a layer of flesh over existing features and smoothed it down. Eyes that couldn't open, a mouth that couldn't speak, a nose that couldn't breathe, all of them trapped beneath a surface that shouldn't exist. The truck straightened out, and Carolyn gasped for breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. In her mirror, the figure was still standing in the middle of the highway, arms extended, and now it was turning to follow her again. But this time it didn't disappear. It started walking, following her truck, moving with that same jerky, unnatural gait, but covering ground impossibly fast. Carolyn was doing 70 miles per hour, and the figure was keeping pace, walking on the highway behind her, arms still extended in that perpetual request for a ride. She pushed the truck faster, 80 miles per hour, 90. The figure kept walking, never running, never changing its pace, but somehow maintaining the exact distance behind her no matter how fast she went. Carolyn was approaching genuine terror now. She'd been driving long enough to handle most situations. Bad weather, mechanical failures, aggressive drivers. But this was beyond anything she had experience with. This was something that shouldn't exist, operating by rules that didn't match reality. The CB crackled again, that same old gravelly voice. "It's following you now, you must have stopped for it. Even just slowing down is enough. It thinks you were offering it a ride. I didn't pick it up. I'm not stopping. Doesn't matter, you acknowledged it, you showed it attention. That's enough for it to latch on. Now it'll follow you until you either let it in or you get far enough away that it loses interest." How far is that? Don't know. Different for every driver. Could be another 100 miles. Could be 1,000. Carolyn drove through the rest of Montana with that figure walking behind her, always maintaining its distance, always visible in her mirrors. When she stopped for fuel in Cut Bank, she kept the engine running and ran inside to pay as fast as possible. The figure stood at the edge of the parking lot, waiting, watching with the face it didn't have. Other people at the fuel station didn't seem to see it. Carolyn asked the cashier if there was someone standing by the highway entrance, and the cashier looked confused, said no, everything was fine. The figure was visible only to her. It had locked onto her specifically, and no one else could perceive it. She drove into North Dakota, then Minnesota, then Wisconsin. The faceless hitchhiker followed the entire way, sometimes walking on the highway behind her, sometimes appearing in rest areas when she stopped, sometimes standing outside truck stop windows while she tried to eat. Carolyn called in sick, told her dispatcher she had the flu and needed a few days off. She drove to her apartment in Milwaukee and parked her truck, hoping that leaving the vehicle would break whatever connection the figure had established. But when she looked out her apartment window, it was standing on the street below, arms extended, face that wasn't a face pointed up toward her window. She didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel it down there, waiting, patient, eternal. She tried researching it online, found scattered references to faceless hitchhikers in folklore from around the world. Some stories said they were ghosts of people who died on the highway. Some said they were something older, spirits that had attached themselves to roads as humans built them. All the stories agreed on one thing: if you let one into your vehicle, it would never leave. On the 3rd day of this siege, Carolyn made a decision. She walked down to her truck, the figure watching her approach, and she climbed into the cab. She started the engine, took a deep breath, and opened the passenger door. "Get in," she said to the figure. "You want a ride? Fine. Get in." The faceless hitchhiker tilted its head, that smooth surface somehow conveying confusion or surprise. Then it walked to the truck and climbed into the passenger seat with mechanical precision. Up close, it was worse than from a distance. The thing that should have been a face but wasn't moved slightly, as if something underneath was trying to break through but couldn't. The body was dressed in clothing that looked real but didn't quite match any era. Jeans that were the wrong cut, a jacket that was the wrong style, everything slightly off like a copy made from memory rather than reference. It sat in the passenger seat and went completely still. Carolyn drove. She had a plan formed during 3 days of desperation and terror. She drove north out of Milwaukee into the remote areas of northern Wisconsin. She drove for 6 hours, taking progressively smaller roads, moving deeper into empty country. Finally, she reached her destination, a section of state forest where a highway project had been abandoned decades ago. There was a bridge here, half finished, leading to nowhere. The construction had stopped in the 1980s, and nature had reclaimed most of the work. Carolyn stopped the truck at the edge of this half-finished bridge and turned to the figure in her passenger seat. "This is your stop," she said. The figure didn't move. "You wanted a ride, I gave you a ride. Now you need to get out." Still no movement. The thing sat there like a statue, like it would sit there forever if given the chance. Carolyn reached across the cab and opened the passenger door. "Get out." Now, for the first time, the figure responded to a direct command. It turned its head toward the open door, then looked back at Carolyn. That faceless surface somehow conveyed sadness, or longing, or some emotion that humans shouldn't recognize in something that couldn't express emotion. Then it climbed down from the cab and walked toward the abandoned bridge. It stood at the edge, looking out at the incomplete structure, the forest beyond, the nowhere that this road led to. Carolyn closed the passenger door and drove away. She didn't look back. She drove straight through to Milwaukee, parked her truck, and went inside her apartment. The figure wasn't waiting outside her window. She slept for 12 hours and woke up feeling like she'd survived something that should have killed her. The truck's passenger seat showed no sign that anyone had sat in it. No indent in the cushion, no wear on the seatbelt, no evidence of the faceless hitchhiker's presence except in Carolyn's memory. She reported back to work and resumed her normal routes, always avoiding Highway 2 through Montana. And for months, everything seemed fine. But then Carolyn started noticing things, small changes. Her reflection in mirrors looked slightly wrong, the proportions subtly off, the features not quite lining up correctly. Photos of her came out blurred, no matter what camera was used. And sometimes, when she was very tired, she would reach up to touch her face and find it felt smooth, as if her features were receding beneath the surface. She understood then what the old voice on the CB had meant. The faceless hitchhiker hadn't just followed her. It had been trying to merge with her, to use her as an anchor to the physical world. And by letting it into her truck, by giving it that ride, she'd opened a connection that could never be completely closed. Carolyn is still driving, still working her routes, but she avoids mirrors now, avoids having her picture taken. And late at night, in the privacy of her apartment, she checks her face obsessively, making sure her features are still there, still visible, still present. Because she knows what's happening. Slowly, gradually, over years or decades, her face is disappearing, being smoothed away. And when the process completes, she'll become like the thing she picked up. Faceless, patient, eternal. Standing on the side of a highway somewhere, arm extended, waiting for the next driver who's compassionate enough or foolish enough to stop. The faceless hitchhiker is still out there. Still on Highway 2 through Montana, still appearing to drivers, still testing them. And Carolyn knows now that it wasn't the original. It was just one of many. Drivers who'd made the same mistake she did, who'd let it into their vehicles, who'd become part of the phenomenon they'd tried to escape. She wonders how many there are now. How many faceless figures standing on highways around the world, all of them trying to find rides they can't take, all of them slowly converting the drivers who show them kindness into copies of themselves. Carolyn still drives, but she never picks up hitchhikers, not anymore, not ever, because she knows the price of compassion on the highway, and she's already paying it, one slowly disappearing feature at a time.